So we're going to start by talking about April Greiman, who was a designer in New York City in the 1970s, and she decided to be a pioneer in the field. She moved to Los Angeles, which was a little bit more limited in aesthetics at the time, and there were very few museums and galleries, and it was just more or less undeveloped uh, versus the way that it is today. So there was not an established style or design practice there. So this was a way for her to gain some new practices and explore different ways of doing design. April is known as being one of the very first people to use computers to create artwork and design, which was seen as by other people at the time as a very skeptical thing. This was around the time that Macintosh was entering the market. This was a bit after in 1984. So people were not sure if this would be something that would take off when being compared to what could be done just with your hands and more traditional media. However, she did see the digital design as something similar to the desert or some sort of landscape. She thought that the opportunity was completely unexplored, and she was definitely a visionary for seeing the potential of computers before her time. Does take note from the international style, but she did a lot of experimentation that was sort of a post industrial type of aesthetic that was applied to her art. And looking back on the movement today, we call it New Wave artwork, which was basically describing an intuitive, eclectic departure from the organization and neutral objectivity of the grid. Though she worked with two-dimensional images, she always sought to create a three-dimensional effect. This is by the artist Edward Fella, and he was someone who was very influential in his design work. He was known for breaking a lot of rules in typography and design, and his style was very unique to him. And it was based on the theory of deconstruction, but pushed it even to a farther place. It has been said that Fella had as much freedom as painters and sculptors in his catalogs and posters. So he was one of the few typographers who felt that he had the same creative freedoms. Seen as a mixture of high art as well as contemporary culture. So this is a very clever artist named Tibor Kalman. He was the founder of New York firm Evan Company, and he was very interested in exploring the conceptual side of design. There's a lot of humor, a lot of tongue-in-cheek in his artwork. He was also a political activist, meaning that a lot of his work had ways of making people question things that were seen as ordinary at the time, but things that needed to change, such as racial issues. So it was a little bit out of context, and at first looks very generic. You've got just this text that just goes straight across. It looks almost like there's no care. Um, but towards the bottom, you have the letters R, A, I, and S for rains kind of cascading down and hitting the bottom of the image. So this was sort of to poke fun at the international style. This was meant to make a statement that having such a finely tuned typographic style, um, well, he was trying to surprise people and add an unexpected element and placement of his work. And this is another ad that he did for Florent for this trendy restaurant. This was a place that was located in the trendy meatpacking district, and it also had extremely good identity, brand identity, and graphic design. It's by typeface designer Zuzana Lico, and this is Emperor 8, Emperor 10, Emperor 15, and Emperor 19 typefaces from 1984. They are bitmapped fonts. She was from the San Francisco Bay Area, but she was originally from Bratislava, Czechoslovakia. She preferred to do computer-based typeface design because during calligraphy class she wanted to use her left hand because she was left-handed, but she was forced to use her right hand. So this kind of paved the way for her to work with computers. She's married to Rudy van der Lans, and they were together around the time that the Macintosh was introduced. She has described herself as more methodical and her husband as being more intuitive. She and her husband designed uh, Emigre, which is a graphics magazine, and you can see a page of this on the next page. This font typeface, this is called Emperor, and this was designed by magazine to accommodate low resolution printer output. When people started to ask about these, she began to make advertisements in them in their third issue um, because people wanted to inquire about their availability. And so this magazine, Emigre, was used was made with the Macintosh computer's technology. He used MacWrite and MacPaint to plan the unconventional layouts of text, and he printed them on a dot matrix device. This was an issue where they began to use Susanna's typefaces instead of the typewriter text. Interesting about Susanna is she was one of the first people to prove that you didn't necessarily need your hands to create a typeface. So she made it possible for the computer to automate the process um, of the software program. So this could now be used in the creative process as a whole. By Peter Gee, and the text at the bottom of the poster called Martin Luther King Jr. Um, Dr. Martin Luther King from 1968. It kind of shows how he'd like to be remembered after his death. Um, and months later, in April 1968, the same words were used in Dr. King's eulogy after his death. So this poster has 4 versions of the same photograph. It's mirrored on the top and on the bottom. And this photo was taken after he had been jailed from the protests. So using the positive and negative images where the colors are inverted give it the illusion that Dr. King is looking at himself. So you're seeing almost 2 different men. And also the image is meant to evoke the contrast between life and death using the different color schemes. And this was made by something called the photomechanical silkscreen process. Very sickening, and it was shocking still today, as well as during the time. This was from 1970, and it is a photo of the victims of the war, who are presumably innocent babies and children just kind of thrown on the ground with no proper burial, no regard for the loss of their lives. So the text reads, question, and babies, and the answer is, and babies. So they're basically asking through the use of the poster, how can human beings do such terrible things? What justification is there for this unspeakable act, whether it's military or political goals? Um, so the idea is that the viewer would say, "Oh no, this is terrible." So the photographer here is Ron Haberl and Peter Brandt, who wrote the caption. So this was protesting the war, much like Dadaism did at the time. And the use of red was likely meant to evoke blood. And the letters are superimposed and transparent so that you can see the image beneath it. So we're going to talk about the image on the left here. This is done by Sheila L. de Bretteville. It's called Pink from 1973, and this is one of the first examples of street art. Sheila was definitely a huge feminist. In 1990, she became the director of the Yale University graduate program in graphic design and the first woman to receive tenure at the Yale University School of Art. She had a lifelong interest in communal forms of art. She believed that this form of art was essential to the feminist movement in the United States. This was meant to explore the notions of gender as associated with the color pink for an American Institute of Graphic Arts exhibition about color. This was the only entry about that color. So she arranged these squares almost in a calendar-like form. These were things that various women submitted to her, exploring their association with the color pink. And so this kind of formed like a quilt or a calendar. And she was a huge proponent of public artwork, doing a lot of artwork within the city neighborhoods. Barbara Kruger, this is called Your Body is a Battleground from 1989. It is a photographic silkscreen on vinyl. She was a designer who worked for Mademoiselle and House and Garden magazines, and she left commercial design to pursue her signature style, which is these images that are black and white with red text, white text with a red background. And the typeface that she uses is Futura Bold. Her work is a bit reminiscent of the Russian constructivism, um, but this was a very body positive image protest at the time. And her work is considered more as fine art rather than graphic design. In the 80s, she started to create this style called agitprop. So she would use these cropped, large-scale, black and white photographic images juxtaposed with these ironic aphorisms, and they would be printed onto the image. And she used black, white, and red in her artwork. Going back to this one for a second, it's interesting that she uses these pronouns to let the viewer know that she's talking to them. Uh, she implicates them by kind of confusing them as to who is speaking, because these images are essentially anonymous. Here is an example of her work in a gallery or a space. A lot of her work is widely distributed in postcards, tote bags, mugs, t-shirts, posters, umbrellas. And so she's kind of bringing to attention the role of advertising in public, and uh, the boundary between art and commerce. So she's kind of drawing attention to that a little bit. So this would be something that sort of hits you over the head when you walk into the room, and she's trying to draw attention to the potential horrors of having such a world with lots of advertising all over the place. So walking into a room like this could almost be seen as a visual assault of the color and the typeface and the imagery that are really cropped close.